The first scream did not come from a human. It came from the sky. On a night when the moon glowed an impossible shade of crimson, something enormous tore through the clouds before crashing into the heart of Black Hollow Forest with enough force to shake the earth for miles. Birds burst from the trees in frightened waves, wolves fled their dens without looking back, and every creature that called the forest home vanished into the darkness, as if they already knew what had fallen from the heavens. Yet the most terrifying part was not the impact. It was what came after. Hidden among the shattered trees lay the largest dragon anyone had seen in centuries, its midnight scales drenched in blood, one wing ripped nearly in half, and a broken spear buried so deeply in its chest that even breathing looked like agony. The beast tried to rise once, then twice, before collapsing again, its golden eyes slowly losing their light while distant voices echoed through the forest. They were getting closer. The hunters had not come searching for treasure. They had not crossed mountains in pursuit of glory. They had come for one reason alone. Tonight, the Dragon King had to die. The armored riders spread through the forest with frightening precision, carrying weapons forged from enchanted silver that glowed beneath the crimson moon. Their commander lifted a blood-stained dragon scale toward the sky before whispering words that caused every weapon around him to shimmer with ancient magic. They followed a trail that no ordinary creature could have survived, determined to finish what had begun high above the clouds. Whoever this dragon truly was, they feared him enough to gather the greatest dragon slayers alive, and failure was never part of their plan. Far away from the hunters, the dying dragon lifted his head one final time, sensing their approach. His heartbeat slowed. His vision blurred. Then, with the last of his strength, the enormous creature began to change. Massive wings folded into disappearing shadows. Razor-sharp claws became trembling hands. Gleaming scales melted into pale skin. Within seconds, the dragon was gone, replaced by an unconscious young man whose extraordinary appearance seemed almost unreal. Even covered in blood, there was something unmistakably regal about him, as though every kingdom in the world would bow without question if they knew who lay beside the riverbank. But no one was there to recognize him. No one except fate. Only a short distance away, a young herbal healer named Claire carefully gathered moon blossoms beneath the ancient trees. Every evening she walked the forest alone despite countless warnings from nearby villagers. They believed spirits wandered these woods after sunset. They believed monsters hunted beneath the crimson moon. Claire believed something different. She believed fear often kept people from discovering miracles. Since losing both of her parents years earlier, the forest had become her sanctuary instead of her prison. Every plant carried a remedy. Every stream held clean water. Every tree whispered familiar comfort. She knew these woods better than anyone alive. Yet even she froze when she heard the distant crash followed by an unnatural silence. It was the kind of silence that made every instinct beg her to turn around and run home. Instead, she tightened her grip on her basket and slowly walked toward whatever had fallen from the sky. Engage in our comment section and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Drop your location below. And subscribe now so you never miss any of our new videos. Claire followed broken branches, scorched earth, and scattered pools of blood until she reached the river. At first, she thought someone had survived a terrible accident. The young man lying against the rocks looked no older than 30, his dark hair soaked by the current while blood continued flowing from wounds no ordinary weapon could have caused. His breathing was faint, his pulse weaker still. She had treated injured travelers before, but nothing prepared her for this. His skin carried strange glowing markings that faded whenever she looked directly at them, and fragments of black scales rested beneath torn pieces of clothing before disappearing completely. Claire blinked, convinced exhaustion was playing tricks on her eyes. Whatever she had just seen made no sense. She knelt beside him anyway, pressing her fingers gently against his neck. He was still alive, but only barely. Every lesson her parents had taught her echoed inside her mind. Never leave the wounded behind. Never measure a life by how dangerous it appears. Save first. Ask questions later. Without realizing it, Claire had made a decision that would alter the fate of kingdoms. She snapped the enchanted spear shaft protruding from his chest, knowing she could never remove the blade while they remained exposed. Using every ounce of strength she possessed, she dragged the unconscious stranger toward an abandoned hunter's cabin hidden beneath thick vines several hundred yards away. The journey felt endless. More than once she almost collapsed from exhaustion. Several times she heard distant horses moving through the forest, forcing her to hide behind fallen trees until the sounds faded again. She never saw the hunters, but they were close enough for torchlight to flicker between the branches. They searched everywhere except the one place where Claire struggled to keep the stranger alive. Inside the cabin she lit a small fire, boiled herbs, stitched torn flesh, and worked through the night while praying he would survive until sunrise. She did not know his name. She did not know where he had come from. She certainly did not know why enchanted weapons had nearly killed him. All she knew was that someone wanted him dead with terrifying determination. Hours passed before the stranger finally stirred. His eyes opened only briefly, revealing brilliant gold that seemed to glow like liquid fire before fading back to an ordinary shade. He looked at Claire with confusion rather than fear, as though awakening in a stranger's cabin was less surprising than the fact that he was still alive. His lips parted, struggling to form words that refused to come. Instead, he reached weakly toward her hand, stopping just inches away before losing consciousness once again. Claire exhaled in relief. If he could wake, he could survive. She quietly replaced the blood-soaked bandages, unaware that the wound beneath them was already healing far faster than any human body ever could. Outside, the wind carried distant voices through the forest once again. The hunters had not abandoned their search. They were closing in, following traces invisible to ordinary eyes, convinced their prey could not have traveled far. Their commander made one promise before ordering his men deeper into Black Hollow Forest. "Find the king before dawn," he said. "If the girl who hid him is still breathing, leave no witnesses." Claire heard none of those words. She simply remained beside the stranger until the first pale light of morning began pushing away the darkness outside the cabin. She believed she had rescued an injured traveler from certain death. She believed sunrise would bring answers. She could not have imagined that before the sun fully climbed above the trees, kingdoms would begin hunting the young woman who had unknowingly saved the greatest enemy they had ever feared. Morning arrived quietly, but peace never followed it into the little cabin hidden beneath the ancient pines. Claire had barely slept. She remained seated beside the stranger, replacing damp cloths across his fevered forehead while carefully preparing another mixture of crushed herbs and mountain roots. Every instinct told her his injuries should have claimed his life hours ago. The enchanted blade had pierced dangerously close to his heart. His body had lost enough blood to leave any ordinary man beyond saving, and yet something impossible was happening before her eyes. The wounds she had stitched during the night were already closing. The deep gash across his shoulder had become little more than a faint scar. Even his breathing had grown stronger with every passing hour. Claire had spent her entire life studying medicine passed down through generations of healers, but she had never witnessed anything remotely similar. She tried convincing herself that miracles happened every day if people simply paid enough attention, though deep inside she knew this was something else entirely. Whoever this stranger truly was, nature itself seemed determined to keep him alive. Just after sunrise, his eyes opened once again. This time they remained open long enough for him to study the unfamiliar room around him before finally settling on Claire. There was caution in his expression, but there was also gratitude that required no words. He slowly attempted to sit upright before pain forced him back onto the bed. Claire immediately moved beside him, gently pressing a hand against his shoulder. "Don't," she whispered. "You're lucky to be alive." The stranger looked down at the blood-stained bandages wrapped tightly across his chest before returning his gaze to her. For several long moments he said nothing, almost as if he were deciding how much truth to reveal. Finally, in a voice weakened by exhaustion, he spoke only 2 words. "Thank you." His voice carried an unusual calmness, deep and steady despite his injuries. Claire smiled politely before asking the obvious question. "What's your name?" The stranger hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second. His real name could never be spoken here. Entire kingdoms had once trembled at the sound of it. So he chose another. Ethan, he answered softly. It was the first lie he had ever told to someone who had shown him kindness. Claire introduced herself before offering him warm broth and fresh water. Ethan accepted both gratefully, though every movement still caused visible discomfort. As the morning continued, small conversations gradually replaced the silence. Claire spoke about the forest, the herbs she collected, and the quiet life she had built after losing her parents years before. Ethan listened far more than he spoke. In truth, listening had become easier than remembering. His memories existed only as scattered fragments buried beneath pain. He recalled soaring through endless clouds. He remembered standing inside a magnificent throne room carved from black crystal. He remembered fire, betrayal, and someone he had once trusted driving an enchanted spear into his chest while soldiers surrounded him from every direction. Each memory arrived like lightning before disappearing just as quickly. Whenever he tried forcing himself to remember more, unbearable pain filled his mind. Claire noticed his distant expression and wisely chose not to press him with questions he clearly could not answer. Far beyond the cabin, the hunters had resumed their search with renewed determination. Their commander examined broken branches, dried blood, and strange marks left across the forest floor before stopping beside the riverbank where the dragon had transformed. Kneeling carefully, he picked up a single strand of dark hair resting between the rocks. His face hardened immediately. He changed forms, he said quietly. None of the other hunters looked surprised. They already suspected they were chasing far more than an ordinary dragon. Their commander slowly stood before issuing another order. Search every village, every cabin, every abandoned shelter within 20 miles. Someone has him. Someone made the mistake of keeping him alive. The hunters divided into smaller groups, disappearing among the trees while enchanted birds were released into the skies above. These creatures possessed extraordinary senses capable of detecting traces of dragon magic that ordinary eyes could never see. Every passing hour brought them closer to Claire's doorstep, though she remained completely unaware of the danger steadily surrounding her. Over the next several days, Ethan regained his strength at a pace that defied reason. He insisted on helping around the cabin despite Claire's repeated protests. At first, he struggled with even the simplest tasks, but his remarkable endurance quickly became impossible to ignore. Heavy bundles of firewood that normally required 2 people to carry seemed almost weightless in his hands. He repaired broken fences with astonishing speed, climbed towering trees as though gravity barely affected him, and instinctively recognized poisonous plants despite claiming to remember almost nothing. Claire noticed these unusual moments, but chose to keep her observations to herself. She had learned long ago that everyone carried secrets they were not yet ready to share. Ethan appreciated that more than she realized. For the first time in countless years, someone looked at him without fear, without expectation, and without seeing a crown resting upon his head. Around Claire, he was simply a wounded traveler recovering beneath her care. The simplicity of that life stirred something inside him that centuries of power had quietly buried. One evening, while gathering herbs together beneath the fading sunlight, Claire slipped on loose stones beside a steep hillside. Before she could even cry out, Ethan crossed nearly 30 feet in what seemed like the blink of an eye, catching her effortlessly before she struck the ground. Claire stared at him in stunned silence. She knew exactly how far away he had been only moments earlier. No human being could have reached her that quickly. Ethan realized his mistake immediately. He gently helped her stand before stepping back, searching desperately for an explanation that would sound believable. "I suppose I'm recovering faster than either of us expected," he said with an awkward smile. Claire studied him carefully but simply nodded. Although she accepted his answer outwardly, questions continued growing quietly inside her heart. That night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, Claire noticed something remarkable. Faint golden light escaped from beneath the bandages wrapped around his chest. Curious, she carefully lifted one corner of the cloth. The terrible wound left by the enchanted spear had almost completely disappeared. Resting where torn flesh should have remained were several smooth black scales that shimmered like polished obsidian before fading back beneath ordinary skin. Claire quickly lowered the bandage, convinced exhaustion had clouded her vision once again. Yet the image refused to leave her thoughts. Ethan's own nights became increasingly restless. Strange dreams returned with greater intensity, each revealing another forgotten piece of his past. He stood once more inside a magnificent palace carved into the side of an ancient mountain where thousands of dragons filled the skies overhead. They bowed as he walked among them. A jeweled crown rested upon his head while an older dragon with silver scales declared before the gathered kingdom, "Long live our king." Then the dream shifted without warning. Smiling faces became frightened ones. Trusted advisors drew hidden weapons. Fire consumed towering halls. One familiar face emerged from the smoke, holding the enchanted spear that still haunted Ethan's memories. "A kingdom belongs to the strongest," the traitor whispered before driving the weapon through his heart. Ethan awoke violently, gasping for breath as flames seemed to burn behind his eyes. Claire rushed to his side, frightened by the terror written across his face. She gently placed a hand over his trembling fingers, and almost instantly his breathing slowed. Neither of them noticed that the dragon mark hidden beneath his skin glowed softly at her touch before disappearing once more. As dawn approached again, danger drew even closer. High above the forest, one of the enchanted hunting birds suddenly changed direction before circling repeatedly over the valley where Claire's cabin stood hidden beneath the trees. Miles away, the commander looked toward the sky and smiled for the first time since the hunt had begun. He quietly mounted his horse before speaking only one sentence. "We found him." Ethan remained unaware that his enemies were approaching with an army large enough to surround the entire forest. Claire believed another peaceful morning awaited them. Neither of them realized that by sunset, the fragile life they had begun building together would be shattered forever. The morning began with an uneasy silence that neither Claire nor Ethan could explain. The birds that usually filled the forest with song had disappeared. Even the wind seemed to move more carefully between the towering pines, as though the woods themselves were waiting for something to happen. Claire stepped outside with her basket, intending to gather fresh herbs before breakfast, but she stopped after only a few steps. Every instinct she possessed as someone who had spent her entire life in Black Hollow Forest warned her that strangers had entered the valley. Fresh hoofprints marked the damp earth where none had existed the previous evening. Broken branches lined a narrow path leading toward the cabin. Someone had passed through recently, and whoever they were had made no effort to hide their trail. Claire hurried back inside, quietly bolting the door behind her. Ethan immediately recognized the concern on her face. Before she could speak, he was already standing despite the lingering pain in his chest. "What's wrong?" he asked. Claire hesitated for only a moment before answering. "We're not alone anymore." Miles away, the commander of the dragon hunters lowered his enchanted compass and smiled with quiet satisfaction. The ancient artifact had remained dormant for days, refusing to reveal the Dragon King's location. Now the crystal at its center burned with brilliant crimson light, pointing directly toward the hidden cabin. "He is close," the commander whispered. "No dragon can hide forever." His soldiers tightened the straps on their enchanted armor, while others prepared chains forged from moon steel, a rare metal said to weaken dragons in both human and beast forms. They had spent years preparing for this hunt. Every weapon they carried had been crafted for one purpose alone. None of them expected mercy, and none intended to show any. Yet beneath their confidence lingered something else. Fear. They knew exactly who they were pursuing, even if they refused to speak his true title aloud. Legends claimed the Dragon King had never lost a battle before the betrayal that nearly claimed his life. If those stories were even partly true, then cornering him inside the forest could easily become the greatest mistake of their lives. Inside the cabin, Ethan quietly walked toward the small window overlooking the trees. The moment his eyes settled on the distant ridge, fragments of memory struck him with unexpected force. He saw soldiers wearing armor identical to the hunters approaching through the forest. He remembered standing atop castle walls while thousands of warriors below shouted his name. He remembered a royal banner consumed by flames before disappearing beneath clouds of black smoke. Then another face emerged from the depths of his memory, clearer than ever before. A handsome young man wearing a crown stood beside him, smiling warmly as though they were brothers. Moments later, that same man drove the enchanted spear into Ethan's chest while whispering, "The throne belongs to me now." Ethan staggered backward, gripping the edge of the table as pain surged through his mind. His breathing became uneven. Claire rushed forward, supporting him before he could fall. "What happened?" she asked. Ethan looked directly into her eyes, and for the first time since waking beside the river, fear replaced the calmness she had come to know. "They're coming," he said quietly. "And if they find me here, they'll kill anyone who helped me." Claire listened without interrupting. Every answer Ethan offered only created more questions, yet she could hear genuine regret in his voice. Whatever life he had lived before arriving in her cabin clearly refused to release him. She wanted to ask who he truly was, why armed soldiers had crossed kingdoms searching for him, and why impossible things kept happening whenever he was near. Instead, she simply asked one question. "Can you still run?" Ethan looked toward the forest before lowering his eyes. "I can fight," he answered honestly. "Running won't save either of us anymore." Those words settled heavily between them. Claire understood enough to realize that the peaceful days they had shared were ending. Even so, she surprised herself with her next decision. She walked to the fireplace, removed a small wooden box hidden beneath loose stones, and handed Ethan a beautifully crafted dagger that had belonged to her father. "He always said courage isn't the absence of fear," she said softly. "It's choosing who you're willing to stand beside even when you're afraid." Ethan accepted the dagger with visible emotion. No one had stood beside him without expecting power, wealth, or protection in return. Claire expected none of those things. She simply refused to abandon someone she believed deserved another chance to live. The hunters surrounded the valley shortly before noon. They moved with remarkable discipline, sealing every possible escape route before advancing toward the cabin in complete silence. The commander raised one hand, signaling his soldiers to stop several hundred yards away. He wanted confirmation before risking unnecessary casualties. One of his scouts slipped quietly through the trees until the weathered cabin finally came into view. Through a narrow gap between the wooden shutters, he spotted Claire preparing medicine while Ethan stood nearby sharpening the old hunting dagger. The scout's heartbeat quickened. Although Ethan appeared completely human, something about his presence felt overwhelmingly unnatural. Even from a distance, his eyes carried an ancient authority impossible to ignore. The scout immediately retreated to report what he had seen. The commander's expression darkened. "It's him," he said. "The Dragon King survived." Several younger soldiers exchanged nervous glances. They had grown up hearing terrifying stories about the ruler whose dragon fire could melt castles and whose wings once covered entire battlefields in shadow. Facing him wounded had been frightening enough. Facing him healthy was another matter entirely. Ethan sensed the danger moments before the first arrow struck the cabin wall. The enchanted projectile shattered the wooden beam beside Claire's head, embedding itself deep into the floor while glowing with strange silver light. More arrows followed instantly, tearing through windows and walls from every direction. Ethan reacted without hesitation, throwing himself between Claire and the incoming attack as splintered wood exploded across the room. "Stay behind me," he shouted. Outside, the commander stepped into the clearing, his voice echoing across the valley. "Your Majesty," he called calmly. "Your kingdom has waited long enough. Come peacefully, and perhaps the girl will survive." Ethan's expression changed completely. The warmth Claire had come to know disappeared beneath something ancient and terrifying. His golden eyes burned brighter than she had ever seen before. "Leave," Ethan warned quietly. "This has nothing to do with her." The commander laughed. "Everything involving the Dragon King concerns us now." Claire froze. The title echoed endlessly inside her mind. Dragon King. She looked at Ethan, searching desperately for denial, for some explanation that would make the impossible seem ordinary again. Instead, Ethan slowly closed his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I wanted one more day where I wasn't a king." Before Claire could respond, the hunters launched their full assault. Enchanted chains flew through shattered windows while heavily armored soldiers stormed toward the cabin from every direction. Ethan caught the first chain before it wrapped around him, snapping the moonsteel links with startling ease. The second chain struck his shoulder, burning his skin on contact. A low growl escaped his throat, deeper than any human voice should have been capable of producing. The ground beneath the cabin trembled violently. The walls began to crack. Claire stared in stunned silence as dark markings spread across Ethan's skin like rivers of molten gold. Black scales pushed through flesh along his arms and neck. His eyes transformed completely, glowing like twin suns beneath gathering clouds. The air itself seemed unable to contain the immense power awakening inside him. Every hunter instinctively stepped backward. They had found the Dragon King at last, but they had also awakened the creature they feared most. The first roar shattered every window in the cabin before a single wall collapsed. It was not merely loud. It carried the weight of centuries, rolling across black hollow forest like thunder that refused to end. Every horse in the hunters' ranks reared in terror, throwing riders onto the forest floor. Birds erupted from the trees in frantic waves, while the ground itself trembled beneath an ancient power that had remained hidden for far too long. Claire instinctively covered her ears, yet her eyes never left Ethan. The man she had rescued beside the river was disappearing before her, replaced by something both magnificent and terrifying. Black scales spread across his body with astonishing speed, each one reflecting the crimson daylight like polished obsidian. Massive wings burst through what remained of his torn shirt, unfolding until they stretched far beyond the shattered cabin. Two elegant horns curved upward from his head, and his golden eyes burned brighter than molten metal. Even wounded, even surrounded, he looked less like a creature fighting for survival and more like a king finally remembering who he truly was. Every hunter who stood before him understood the same horrifying truth. They had not cornered a dying dragon. They had awakened the ruler they had spent years praying would never return. The commander steadied himself before raising his enchanted spear toward the sky. "Hold your ground," he shouted, though fear had already begun spreading through his soldiers. "He's weakened. Strike together." Dozens of enchanted arrows flew through the air at once, their silver tips glowing with dragon-killing magic. Ethan spread one enormous wing across Claire before the arrows could reach her. They slammed into his scales with bursts of blinding light, driving him backwards several steps, but failing to pierce deeply enough to stop him. Pain flashed across his face, yet it only fueled the fury building inside him. With one powerful sweep of his wings, a violent gust ripped through the clearing, sending armored soldiers crashing into trees while snapping centuries-old trunks like dry branches. Before anyone could recover, Ethan lunged forward. His movements were astonishingly fast despite his massive form. Claws capable of tearing through solid stone ripped enchanted weapons from trembling hands before hurling them harmlessly into the river. He fought with remarkable restraint, disabling rather than killing whenever possible, as though some part of him still refused to become the monster his enemies believed him to be. Claire watched the battle unfold with her heart racing so violently she could barely breathe. Everything she believed about the world had changed within moments, yet one truth remained impossible to ignore. Ethan had every opportunity to abandon her the instant his true nature was revealed. Instead, every movement he made placed himself between her and danger. Every attack he endured protected her. Even now, surrounded by enemies determined to destroy him, his first concern remained her safety. That realization broke through every fear still lingering inside her. She stepped cautiously from the remains of the cabin, ignoring the commander shouting for his soldiers to seize her. "Ethan," she cried with every ounce of strength she possessed. The Dragon King turned immediately. For one brief moment, the terrifying beast vanished behind the familiar warmth she had seen since the day she found him beside the river. It lasted only seconds, but Claire understood everything she needed to know. The dragon before her was still the same man who had thanked her for saving his life, repaired broken fences, carried firewood without complaint, and smiled quietly whenever she laughed. His true form had changed nothing about the heart she had come to know. The commander recognized the hesitation in Ethan's eyes and acted without warning. Pretending to retreat, he secretly drew a smaller, enchanted dagger concealed beneath his armor before charging directly toward Claire. "If we cannot kill the king," he shouted, "we'll destroy the reason he still fights." Claire barely had time to react before the commander closed the distance between them. Ethan's roar echoed across the valley with such force that the very air seemed to shake. In the blink of an eye, he placed himself between Claire and the enchanted blade. The dagger plunged deep into his shoulder instead, releasing ancient runes that glowed brilliantly across his scales. Ethan staggered, dropping to one knee as the weapon's magic spread through his body like fire. The commander smiled triumphantly, believing victory finally belonged to him. "Moonsteel blessed by the old kingdoms," he whispered. "Even dragons kneel before it." But instead of collapsing, Ethan slowly lifted his head. His eyes no longer burned with anger alone. They carried grief, betrayal, and a determination stronger than either. With one powerful motion, he grasped the enchanted dagger and pulled it free, ignoring the agony that followed. Golden blood fell onto the forest floor, and wherever it landed, wildflowers instantly bloomed through broken earth. The impossible sight silenced everyone. Even the commander stared in disbelief as life emerged from ground scarred by battle. Claire looked from the blooming flowers to Ethan, suddenly remembering stories her mother used to tell before bedtime. Legends spoke of a dragon king whose blood carried the power to restore what war had destroyed. She had dismissed those stories as comforting fairy tales meant for children. Standing before Ethan now, she realized those ancient tales had never been fiction. They had been history. Ethan slowly rose to his full height, towering above every soldier in the clearing. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried quiet authority instead of rage. "I offered mercy because I remembered what it meant to rule," he said calmly. "You answered with another attempt on an innocent life." He looked directly at the commander, whose confidence had begun dissolving into panic. "You mistake kindness for weakness." Those words settled over the battlefield like a final warning. Every hunter instinctively stepped backward, sensing that the battle was about to change forever. Then the sky answered its king. A deafening roar echoed from somewhere beyond the mountains, followed by another and another, until dozens of ancient voices rolled across the heavens together. The hunters slowly looked upward as enormous shadows emerged through the clouds. One by one, dragons of every color appeared, their colossal wings stretching across the crimson sky. Black dragons circled beside silver ones. Emerald dragons flew alongside crimson giants whose scales shimmered like living fire. They were not attacking. They were gathering. As the first great dragon descended toward the clearing, it landed before Ethan and immediately lowered its massive head in absolute submission. Then another dragon did the same. And another. Within moments, creatures that kingdoms had feared for generations knelt before the wounded King Claire had rescued beside the river. Ethan stared silently at them, memories flooding back with every familiar face. His people had found him. They had never stopped searching. Across the battlefield, the hunters realized the terrible truth far too late. They had not been pursuing the last surviving dragon. They had walked directly into the return of an empire. The valley fell into complete silence as the last dragon lowered its head before Ethan. The hunters had marched into Black Hollow Forest believing they were pursuing a wounded fugitive. Instead, they found themselves standing before the rightful ruler of an empire that had never truly fallen. Claire looked around in stunned disbelief as dragons of every size covered the mountains, their wings stretching across the horizon until they seemed to become part of the sky itself. Some remained in their magnificent dragon forms while others stepped forward and transformed into men and women dressed in elegant armor unlike anything she had ever seen. Their movements carried the quiet discipline of warriors who had served one king for centuries. Every eye remained fixed on Ethan, waiting for a single command. Yet the Dragon King gave none. He simply stood there, his gaze drifting toward Claire before returning to the army that had finally found him. In that single moment, his people understood something none of them had expected. Their king had changed. The loneliness that had followed him for centuries was gone, replaced by a quiet strength born not from conquest, but from compassion. The commander refused to surrender. Even surrounded by dragons, pride would not allow him to accept defeat. He slowly raised his enchanted spear one final time and shouted for his remaining soldiers to attack. It was a desperate order, and most of them hesitated. They had watched their finest weapons fail. They had witnessed dragons appear by the hundreds. They knew the battle had already been decided. Still, a handful charged forward beside their commander. Ethan closed his eyes briefly before opening them again with calm determination. "Enough," he said. His voice was neither loud nor angry, yet every dragon heard it as clearly as if he had spoken beside them. The earth beneath the hunters suddenly trembled before thick stone pillars rose from the ground, surrounding the soldiers without harming them. Their weapons were ripped from their hands by invisible force before falling harmlessly into the river. The commander struggled furiously against the walls of stone until Ethan walked toward him, every step carrying the quiet confidence of a king reclaiming his place in history. "You hunted me across kingdoms," Ethan said. "You tried to murder the woman who saved my life. Yet I will not answer hatred with more hatred. Return to those who sent you. Tell them their king lives. Tell them I am coming home. And tell them the throne they stole belongs to its rightful ruler." The commander stared in disbelief. Mercy was the one punishment he had never expected to receive. Word of the Dragon King's return spread faster than any rider could travel. Before the next sunrise, every kingdom bordering the Dragon Realm had heard whispers that the impossible had happened. The ruler believed dead had survived. Noble families who had sworn loyalty to the usurper quietly began changing sides. Ancient dragon clans emerged from hiding after years of exile, each pledging themselves once more to Ethan's banner. Hidden fortresses opened their gates, and forgotten allies stepped into the light. Claire watched all of this unfold from a distance, still struggling to understand how the quiet stranger she had nursed back to health could inspire such unwavering devotion. One evening, while standing beside the same river where she had first found him, Ethan joined her in silence. "You should leave before the war begins," he said softly. "The closer you stay to me, the greater the danger becomes." Claire looked at the flowing water before answering. "When I found you here, I didn't know you were a king." Ethan nodded. "I know." She smiled gently. "If I had known, I still would have saved you." For the first time since reclaiming his memories, Ethan allowed himself to smile without restraint. It was not the smile of a conqueror. It was the smile of a man who had finally found someone who saw him before seeing his crown. Days later, the dragon army crossed into the capital that had once belonged to Ethan's ancestors. Towering black walls surrounded the city, but fear had already weakened those defending them. The usurper king, Ethan's cousin Adrian, stood upon the palace balcony wearing the stolen dragon crown. Years earlier, he had betrayed his own blood to seize absolute power, believing the Dragon King would never return. Now he watched thousands of dragons filling the skies above his kingdom. His confidence disappeared the moment Ethan landed before the palace gates. Their eyes met across the battlefield without a single word spoken. They had been raised together, trained together, and once trusted each other more than anyone else in the world. That trust had ended with a spear driven through Ethan's heart. Adrian slowly drew the same enchanted blade he had used on the night of his betrayal. "You should have died," he whispered. Ethan looked at the weapon before calmly answering, "I almost did. Then someone reminded me that kindness is stronger than revenge." The battle for the throne lasted until sunset. Dragons and dragon shifters clashed above the palace, while warriors fought across marble courtyards below. Fire illuminated the skies as ancient powers collided once more after years of silence. Ethan fought not with blind fury, but with absolute purpose, protecting innocent lives whenever possible while driving steadily toward the throne room where Adrian waited. At last the two stood face to face inside the Hall of Kings. Broken pillars surrounded them, and the stolen crown rested upon the ancient throne between them. Adrian attacked first, driven by desperation rather than skill. Ethan defended each strike with remarkable restraint before finally disarming his cousin. The enchanted spear shattered against the stone floor. Adrian collapsed to his knees, defeated at last. Every dragon in the palace waited for the execution they believed would follow. Instead, Ethan turned away from the fallen usurper. "Take him from my sight," he ordered his guards. "He will spend the rest of his life remembering the kingdom he chose to betray." Shock spread throughout the throne room. Once again, mercy proved stronger than vengeance. As cheers echoed through the capital, the elders approached Ethan carrying the dragon crown that had belonged to generations of rulers before him. The oldest among them bowed deeply before speaking. "Your Majesty, your throne awaits." Ethan looked toward the magnificent seat carved from ancient crystal before slowly shaking his head. The elders exchanged confused glances. "There is someone I must see first," he replied. Without another word, he left the throne room and walked through the palace until he found Claire standing alone on a balcony overlooking the city. She had watched the battle from afar, uncertain whether the man she cared for would return. Ethan stopped a few steps away from her, no longer wearing armor, no longer carrying weapons. For the first time since she had known him, he looked simply like the man she had met beside the river. "I came back," he said quietly. Claire laughed through tears. "You always were stubborn." Ethan stepped closer until only a breath separated them. "I crossed kingdoms searching for revenge," he admitted. "But somewhere along the way, I found something worth protecting instead." Gently, he lifted her hand and kissed it before resting his forehead against hers. "Claire," he whispered, "I have ruled dragons for centuries, yet no victory has ever meant as much as finding you. I don't ask because I'm a king. I ask because I'm a man who loves you. Will you stand beside me?" Claire looked into the same golden eyes that had first opened inside her tiny cabin and smiled. "Yes." The moment their lips met, a warm golden light surrounded them both. Every dragon in the kingdom looked toward the palace at once. Ancient symbols appeared beneath Claire's skin before glowing softly along her hands and wrists. Ethan stepped back in surprise as the oldest dragon elder slowly fell to one knee. Then another elder knelt. Soon, every dragon in the courtyard followed. Claire looked around in confusion. "Why are they bowing?" she asked. The elder's voice trembled with emotion. "Because the prophecy has awakened." Claire frowned. "What prophecy?" The elder lifted his eyes toward her. "Long before our present king was born, the first dragons foretold that the one destined to unite dragons and humans would never be born among us. She would arrive as an ordinary human with a healer's heart. She would save the Dragon King when every kingdom wished him dead, and only through her would peace finally become possible." Claire looked toward Ethan, who appeared just as surprised as she was. Before either of them could speak again, a brilliant white dragon descended from the clouds and landed in the palace courtyard. It lowered its great head, not before Ethan, but before Claire. The elder smiled as tears filled his ancient eyes. "Welcome home, Your Majesty." The celebrations continued for days, but neither Ethan nor Claire allowed power to change the people they had become. Together they rebuilt villages destroyed by war, welcomed dragons and humans into the same cities, and opened the ancient forests to heal once more. The throne that had once represented fear slowly became a symbol of hope. Yet beyond the Eastern Sea, where forgotten kingdoms lay hidden beneath endless storms, an old pair of crimson eyes opened deep within a mountain. A voice, rough with centuries of silence, spoke only one sentence. "The Dragon King has reclaimed his crown, and the Dragon Queen has finally appeared." The mountain trembled as enormous wings unfolded inside the darkness. Some stories end when a throne is reclaimed. This one truly begins there. Claire believed she had saved a dying stranger on a lonely night beneath a crimson moon. Instead, she had saved a king, restored an empire, awakened an ancient prophecy, and changed the destiny of two worlds forever. But one question remains. If you had been standing beside that river on the night everything began, would you have walked away? Or would you have reached out your hand and changed history? Let us know your answer in the comments, and if you enjoyed this story, Don't forget to subscribe because the next chapter will reveal the powerful enemy already sailing toward the Dragon Kingdom.